brother. And while I was bugging him while he was running down the hall, he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm saying, and I said, "I'm fulfilling my one purpose in life."
I used to love bugging my sister at school. I'm gonna put you in the corner and like all blank seats around you. I told you last year it was random. Randomly generated. Okay. Okay. Can I please be in the corner? My social life cannot handle that. Okay. Please be in the corner. We're not changing seats right now. I'm in the corner. I like being surrounded by people. That's our force illustration. And I am forced to make my family. You should become a teacher. That's really nice. I don't want to be on everyone always tells me. I want to be a marine biologist. But I go out and see all these people like me also and like what the same things I like. And they'll let me go and we'll be able to go. I have a student who daydream that right now. She wants to be a Victoria. She loves her. Like she is the best. Like they cannot be so wrong. There's just creatures. All sea creatures are so nice. Oh my god. They're just like they were essentially talking about these people bottle feeding baby manatees, and it was the cutest thing I've ever seen. It was so whatever comes up, so be it. I see whales.
Has no use. It's like fly. A fly can be killed. So
okay, so I let you know if you want to do annotations and check off your reading that way, I will come around, just show them to me. And if you would like to do the prompts, you got 5 minutes. It's open book. You can use your book. I'm going to cut you off in 5 minutes. We're going to get through these 3 questions. How do you feel about leaving to Baltimore? Tell me about the character arc of Sophia Old. He calls her Mrs. Old a lot. This is the woman who is his master in Baltimore. And then what happens to his grandmother? That takes us up to where you're supposed to be. So yeah, great question. So if you did annotations, I still want you to do the prompts for your binders. But if you did not do annotations, you're going to be turning in the prompt for credit. Okay. And these go on quarter 2. These and the ones from last semester.
I don't.
Hey. Okay, 2 more minutes for this. I am just looking to make sure that you know the answer, so rush through now to finish it. Any detail you can give me that shows that you read will work. Will you put it in the drawer for me?
Yeah, sure. I just want to make sure that you were.
Yeah. Oh, is your name on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wait, I can do it. I have to. And okay, finish your sentence. Put your name on it if you're turning it in for points. If you showed me annotations, you are not turning it in. I'm good. And just go put it in the drawer for me. Thank you. Yes. And let's do word of the day. Yes, such a cute outfit today, Arwen. The shoes on up. All right, we got a good word of the day today.
That's not the ones I watched, couldn't tell.
Jordan just turned off the dinosaur run.
They did?
I know.
Yes.
They suck.
What? They did that a while ago. Well, I haven't tried to put one because this is an anti-fun.
All right, pull out your word of the day forms. Speaking of anti-fun.
Oh, shit, Sherlock.
I know. Wait, is it anapod?
It's anadiplosis.
Why does it anapod? I'm so
That
sorry.
sounds like it.
That's anapod.
Anapod.
Wait,
I think it is.
anapod.
It is not a disease. It is repeating
That sounds like something that would be wrong with your eyes.
the last word,
I
like
can't spell it
astigmatism,
though.
or
No.
phrase of a clause at the beginning of the next clause.
Why are there so many big words for pretty much the same?
Because the Latin, like the Greeks and let's just stick with the Greeks. The Greeks loved looking at rhetoric and figuring out all the different tricks in language that you can use to persuade people. So they were the ones who named all this stuff.
That's it.
Well, they suck.
No,
So a clause or a cause?
clause.
Clause, like a phrase of
Like
a
a Santa
clause?
Claus?
So a clause, so
Is it like a
being the last word of a phrase,
Being like, kind of like,
Santa.
there we go, or a clause. There we
or
go.
a clause?
Yeah.
Okay.
A phrase or a clause at the beginning of the next clause.
So you put a clause at the beginning of it.
Yes, let me show you how it works. Okay, so don't write these down as examples. I'll repeat. Do not write these down as examples. These are just like to show you what this is because it's hard to explain. So it's like
the
this.
exact opposite
She
right now.
opened a cafe. A cafe that ruined her financially. I just pulled these offline, so they're kind of weird.
So
There we go. She opened a cafe. We have this kind of idea, this phrase entered or this word entered into the sentence, right? And then there's a comment, which means we're starting the beginning of a new clause and we repeat that word or phrase at the beginning of the new clause.
That sounds really.
She opened a cafe that ruined her financially. Or when you love with all your heart. So we end the clause with this word and then repeat the next clause with that word. And you can do it with a sentence too. Like if you had a period there, it would work the same way. Here's another one. Again, don't write this down as your example. It is the east. And Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun. And then it goes on. So you get the sun right here at the end of the clause, end of the sentence, and then it's repeated again close to the beginning of the next one. So it's okay to have some words in between, but it's that idea of it repeating at the end of one to the beginning of the next. Make sense? Okay, so let's look at the one from Frederick Douglass. I'm just going to write it down instead of having us turn to it. It says, to be accused was to be convicted, and to be convicted was to be punished. Okay, that's your example to write down. To be accused was to be convicted, and to be convicted was to be punished. Okay. This is on page 13. Might be helpful to write down the page number because eventually you're going to have to write about this book. And if you have all these resources, you could choose to write about this part of it. To be accused was to be convicted, and to be convicted was to be punished. Okay, so this is an anadiplosis because, well, why don't I ask you, why is this an anadiplosis, Salmon?
It's like to be convicted and then minus the and, it says to be convicted.
Yeah, exactly. We've got that repetition happening right there, right? And it creates this like real nice flow to the sentence. That's part of why a writer would use this, I think. But let's think about like what this sentence is doing in the text. At this part, it is when he is talking about how, I'll read it to you. Mr. Gore acted fully up to the maxim laid down by slaveholders. It is better that a dozen slaves suffer under the lash than that the overseer should be convicted in the presence of slaves of having been at fault. No matter how innocent a slave might be, it availed him nothing when accused by Mr. Gore of any misdemeanor. So he's talking about how like maybe everybody else has a innocent until proven guilty, but if you are a slave in the South, you have a guilty and you're never going to be proven innocent. It's just someone accuses you, okay, you're guilty.
I find it really interesting that if this were a fictional story that you were just to an editor, they'd be like, that is the stupidest thing ever. That these two overseers in a row are Mr. Severe and Mr. Gore.
I know.
And yet,
It's like it seems so obvious, and yet it's the real names. Did we talk about that yet in here? How it was the real names? Yeah, it's like those were really their names, and he always talks about it too. He's like, well, he talks about it with Mr. Severe, right? Like he was aptly named.
right.
It seems like too big of a coincidence. I totally agree, but it was real.
Maybe that's why they became overseers.
Yeah, maybe they were just like, well, my name says it, so no one's gonna believe I'm like a nice kindergarten teacher, but I better do this instead. Yeah, okay, so why do you think he words it this way? Ammon?
Well, like, it kind of reminds me, like, to be accused, it's like, to be accused, it's kind of like, I have like 7 dogs in my house, so walking in and you see like some woods, like on my door is chewed up. If any little dog looks the least bit suspicious, you automatically are like, you.
Uh-huh.
And it's like the same thing with like this Mr. Gore, Mr. Severe guy. They're like, okay, you might be innocent, but I don't care. You're just an animal. So
Yeah.
like you don't ask the dog, hey, why'd you do this? Or hey, did you do this? You give it a pop on the nose and say, oh.
Right. Well,
My doctor,
the idea is that you're not gonna give an answer, right? So why bother? And I think that's a huge part of it is like, it doesn't really matter what your motivation was. It doesn't matter if you weren't the one who did it. I'm gonna make an example of the fact that you were accused. Yeah, go ahead.
I also like the to be convicted, like is to be punished, like there was no fair trial, like the innocent until proven guilty. It's like the second you're convicted, you're screwed.
Yes, okay, so this sentence creates this logical order of things, right? If A is true, if you are accused, then B will automatically be true. And if you are then convicted, then C will automatically be true. And so you can kind of take out the middle part and say to be accused was to be punished. Because he's saying that all of these things are going to follow just from the accusation. Bradley?
Right, so from that, I kind of felt like it was almost using this step-by-step thing to make sense of the ridiculous reasoning of these owners just being like, I have a feeling you did this thing,
Yeah.
thus I'm going to punish you.
Good. And I think that's the point here. I think he's pointing out the really bad logic. This is what is called I'm not gonna remember the logical terms. It is, there's like, it's either valid or, okay, let me just say this. The logical structure of it is sound. If this is an if-then statement, it makes sense because to be accused was to be convicted. That logically follows. And if conviction leads to punishment, then that logically follows. So that this logic is true, but the sentiment is bad logic. It's not like true in the way that this should be the way that things operate. Does that make sense a little bit? I think the word is valid, but I'm getting mixed up with my logic terms. So if we're thinking about logos, ethos, and pathos, and what kind of appeal this is, like what kind of appeal is this? Is it an appeal to someone's sense of rationality, to their sense of emotions, or their sense of like credibility, finding Douglas credible? Why do you guys say it might be an appeal to logos here? Yeah.
Like just the rationality of it, to be convicted is to be punished in our day and age. It's like to be accused is to go to a trial and then a jury and then a decision. So it's not really rational to be accused and then immediately convicted and immediately punished.
Calling to mind the logical process that we put so much value in.
It kind of rationalizes how this is not rational.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was going for. It rationalizes how this is not rational. Yes. Okay. So what's really interesting here is by appealing to that sense of logos, then you are also appealing to their sense of values, your audience's values, because this seems like such a cold statement, especially with that repetition. Like it's just this followed then and this. And the word punished, it's not the way he's been talking about punishment at other places in this book, which is, people pointed this out, like Lena pointed this out as she was entering the room, like really gory and really disturbing, you know? He dispenses with all of that here. This is like the coldest statement, but by it being cold and logical, it's like he's appealing to your value system because you're like, this is not the way it should be. Like you feel like the sense of unfairness about it too. All right, write down some of the effects if you haven't already for word of the day. Anadiplosis is a cool one. You don't like it? You're just contrarian. All right, so I'm gonna pass them out. What did we get to last time? We were talking about soap stones, right?
You said we only got to.
We got so.
Yeah, we did
But
SOA.
you weren't gonna go through the rest of it. 'Cause you
No.
wanted us to finish the book first.
No spoilers. Yeah, okay. And then did we get to talk about any part of the book at all, or is that where we ended?
We didn't really talk about
We didn't really talk
That's
about
what I
the
think. Okay.
We did talk about the book because we mentioned like
We
for each
mentioned
one
the
like
book.
had
We were like discussing like
Yeah.
audience and a cage. Okay, so we kind of did the intro, but not actually talking about the text.
Why is it in now?
All right, so this packet, you are not gonna be filling out the whole thing unless you want to fill out the whole thing. This is like kind of a study guide type thing
What
for
is the
you.
bare minimum that we have to fill out?
Well, I'll be telling you along the way what I want you to fill out, and that will be the bare minimum, but I won't be going through the whole thing. So there's a section here that has the chapter number, and Frederick Douglass only numbers all of his chapters. They're Roman numerals, so I don't know if you recognize them as numbers, but those are numbers. But yeah, so he doesn't have like name titles for any of these, right? However, he could have written this book as just a straightforward story, no chapter breaks at all. Here's what happened at the beginning, the middle, the end, and it doesn't, you've read books without chapter breaks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he could have done it that way. He's made a rhetorical decision, a way to be persuasive by dividing it up into chapters. And I think what ends up happening is that each chapter has its own little miniature argument and it has its own little focus. So we could name the chapters, and that's what I'm going to make you do. So we've read through chapter 6. And you're going to look at each chapter and you're going to figure out what is like kind of the main argument in this chapter. And you'll name the chapter based on that argument. So you can be clever with your chapter titles, but it should have something to do with what you think the main argument is in each of the chapters. And if you haven't done the reading by any chance, which I know is none of you, but you can use SparkNotes for this. It will have like chapter summaries on SparkNotes that you can use so you can participate. So you're going to do it in small groups because it's more fun that way with naming chapters. So just with the people you normally work with around you, name the first 6 of them. Okay, and that's all you have to fill out in the blue form for now, just chapter title. Yeah, just name.
I feel like the first chapter should be called
So let's just go to the very first paragraph of his first chapter. I was born, yes. Right from the very beginning, we are getting tons of rhetorically like relevant, let's say persuasive details at the beginning of this that he's purposely crafting to get us to think a certain way about his situation. So I was born in Tuckahoe near Hillsborough and about 12 miles from Easton in Talbot County, Maryland. So detailed on where he's from. You're going to go on to read about how he doesn't know his age. He's not super secure about his parentage, but he knows exactly where this place was that he was born. Why do you think that'd be significant to start with this kind of detail? Megan?
Like sometimes I'd have like younger boys just go like do errands because they weren't for work plantations at the moment.
Okay.
So they have to know exactly where it was. They don't want them running away.
Okay, this is such an important part of this narrative. Like right from the very beginning, he knows his place of employment. From the moment that he is born, he is employed by a plantation, right? And he is, I mean, employed is like not the right word to use for it, but he's enslaved by this plantation. Like this is where he belongs in terms of like his labor. So he's born into slavery, and it's like the one thing I know is like where I have to work, and that's it. Ella?
I feel like it's like his whole life is pretty much like based around that. So it's very hard to
Yes.
so it's like very this is what is most important.
Yes. Yes, I think it's really important here because he's talking about how his environment shaped him as a person, right? And how it turned him into who he was. So the fact that he was born on this particular plantation is very important to who he ended up being, you know? And in that way too, like he doesn't know much about the circumstances of his birth, Frederick Douglass, but he does know this. So the fact that he knows these particular details really tells us a lot about like his investment in knowing his identity too, because even when the details are denied to him, like he's like, well, at least I know this, at least I have one piece of security. And it's really telling that the one piece of security he has is the plantation he belongs to, you know? Okay, we're gonna keep going. By far, the larger part of the slaves, and let me say this before I keep going. Put your phones away. Okay. By far, the largest part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. He makes this simile, this comparison, analogy to horses. Why horses? What does that tell us about his condition, Riley? Right, okay, yes, exactly, so it's a total dehumanization of him, right? Yeah, Lucy?
I mean, yeah, kind of like what Randy was saying, farmers use their horses just for work. They don't use it. They're just workers.
Right, good. So they have no other purpose. It's not like we are paying attention to the horse's hobbies or the horse's interests or the horse's religion. It is just all you are meant to do is to work. Ellen?
So, like, whether it's in like real life or a book, like for example, like people tell you like if you find something, like don't like name it, don't give it like this is your plan. When you give something like a name and like an age and you know something about it, and you like become connected to it, like you're like way more invested into the character being.
Yeah, and if it's like, if we're explaining this then to like how people interact with horses too, is even if you were to name the horse and give the name a horse, it becomes more personal. So the fact that he is denied his age is even like more dehumanizing than you would treat a horse, you know? Tell me about why horses and not other animals. He makes comparisons throughout this book to other different kinds of animals. Like at one point he says that the children are eating like pigs. Here he's talking, but he most often compares to horses. Why horses? Yeah.
I would probably say because like comparing himself to a horse is almost like saying he's just an animal, like using a horse, like using to be worked, because mainly
good.
horses, like now they have like just more of a recreational purpose sometimes, but like majority of horses back then were just working. They were working on plantations. They were like pulling plows. They were mainly work animals, and they weren't.
Yeah.
They were pulling like carts. They weren't ever just there to be like, oh, such a recreational.
Okay, good. So it's not like a pet, a dog or a cat that we look at and we appreciate for its like dogness and its catness. Like the horse is meant to be appreciated for their work, and that is all. Carter?
I think it also demonstrated like the limited knowledge he was given, so he might not have had other animals like at the time, like you at that young age. Right.
Okay, good. So he's limited to this space on a plantation too. So it's not like he wants to compare to like anything more exotic than the animals that are domesticated on the plantation. Lucy?
I think on the flip side, it could also like show like horses are really smart, really strong, but they can't really show that because they're
Yes.
working all the time. I think it's like comparing himself and other slaves to hardworking, strong, smart animals that can't.
Yeah, think of the juxtaposition between a wild horse and a domesticated horse. Wild horses naturally are supposed to serve as this symbol of like, are you guys just getting back from PSAT? Or is it ACT?
No, yeah.
SAT, okay. That wild horses are like this symbol of like the ultimate freedom. Like wild horses can't be broken. They're running through the free expanse of the West, and like our mascot is the Mustang, and yet you compare that to a domesticated horse, and that juxtaposition is really stark. So there's potential there for being very smart and very free and very like this symbol of strength, and yet he doesn't get to experience that part of it. Zoe?
I think there's also like
Yeah. Yes, excellent. Like they're dependent on them. Without the horse, how do you get the work on the farm done? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come nearer to it than planting time, harvest time, cherry time, springtime, or fall time. What is significant of him about him saying all of those different times? Amen.
As a slave on a plantation, your life doesn't revolve around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It revolves around when to plant, when to harvest, when leaves are falling. So that's like their calendar. So
Yeah.
the only way to know when they're born is what they see around them.
Right. And what they're being expected to do, because it's wrapped into the labor of the farm too.
the at, listing of different times, I know that some of them are when, it's really harvested, other times, they're not as pushy. Also slaves, they're not taught months, and, like, years, they're not taught days, they're not taught like, how to tell time, so they just tell it by what.
Okay, so it also signals this lack of formal education too, that like no one cared to explain that to someone. Yeah, I mean, okay, this trivializes it, and I recognize that it trivializes it, but to put it into context where like we might understand it, imagine that like you were telling time by your stuff at work. Like for me, it's like, oh, it's grading time, it's teaching time, it's lesson planning time, and then it's sleep time. Yes, exactly. For you guys, the Arctic Circle, it's milkshake making time, it's taking the money time, it's, yelling at the lady for not having the mask on time or whatever. There's like, Dane's exactly right. It sounds so depressing to be measuring your life by the labor that you are doing, especially when the labor is cyclical like that. Like it's always the same every year. Yeah. Cyclical, like a cycle.
Cyclical.
A want of, yeah, a want of information concerning my own, he's talking about his age, right, was a source of unhappiness to me even during childhood. Why do you think he points out that he was unhappy even during childhood about this? I couldn't tell if it was a hand or just like a flopping of the sleeve. Yes. Yes, okay, good. So there's two important things here. One, anytime we talk about children, we are reaching into that side of us that like it's an appeal to our values and our care for children, right? So there's this way that we want to protect that innocent time for kids, and anytime a kid is upset by something, it's like we don't want him to have to experience that in this time of life that's supposed to be carefree. The other thing that's being addressed here is that there was an assumption, there was rhetoric at the time that the slaves didn't know any better. It was one of the arguments that, people who were pro-slavery were making to keep slavery around. Slaves don't know any better. They are perfectly fine with their condition. Yes, it's hard work. Yes, they don't experience freedom the same way that we do here in the North, or the same way that white people do, right? And yet, like, because they were raised this way, like, it's fine. Keep them that way, They've got other things that are good for them. So there was that kind of rhetoric as pro-slavery rhetoric, and he's pointing out here, he's addressing a counter argument here that was like, I had this source of awareness when I was a child. When I was a child, I knew that this was wrong. So it's not like I was ignorant, like I wasn't allowed to be.
Something is deeply wrong with a child.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So it's like, if a child can see this, why can't you too? Okay. The white children could tell their ages, so he's already starting to make these comparisons and noticing that it's different too. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I like the way he talks about that, deprived, because it's not like he's just ignorant. It is someone who is not allowing him that kind of knowledge. They're taking that away from him. When we are born, the age, the time period, the time exactly that we are born, that's like the first thing we own. And we actually do like tell a lot by that, 1984, I kind of know like everyone born in 1984 has similar experiences. We all remember 9/11 the same way, or we all had the economic recession the same way. And so we all kind of like share something. If you're into astrology, right? Like the time and the date of your birth is really important to you. But just like knowing your age and knowing where developmentally you are, that is important too. And it has been deprived of him. He has no ownership from the very beginning. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it. He deemed all such inquiries on the part of a slave improper and impertinent and an evidence of a restless spirit. What does improper mean? Yeah. Yeah, good. So it's like, It's not talking about it being evil. It's not talking about it having a purpose. It's when you say something's improper, it's like the fussy type of stuff. Don't have your elbows on the table type of stuff, or like which fork you eat with. That's talking about proper. And then it says it was also impertinent. So you guys know what impertinent means?
Sounds like important.
It's kind of related.
Oh.
To be impertinent. Like if one of you were to like come up here and try and give the lesson while without my permission, I would say, hey, that's impertinent. Yeah.
Like assertive, but like abruptly.
Okay, good. So it's like if someone's being impertinent, they're being assertive in a way that's inappropriate for their position. So obviously you are all lower than me on the social hierarchy in this room at least. And so you like stepping out of bounds, it's like stepping out of your lane. So this guy, this owner, this master, he's like, sees this little kid and the little kid wants to know his age. And he won't, he's just like, that's improper, that's impertinent. You don't need to know that. You know, that's not important for you to know that. You shouldn't. Oh, someone's in your seat. It's okay. You can stay there. Is it okay if you sit there for today as well? Yeah. Okay. So it's like, I'm changing this to everyone was talking about it today, so why not? So yeah, so it's like, oh, he's kind of like poo-pooing it, you know, like being flippant about it, when it is obviously something so important for Frederick Douglass. But I love this idea. It's evidence of his restless spirit. I think that's a little bit of a brag on Douglass's part. Like, I would like to be known as someone with a restless spirit. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be somebody who's like complacent and traditional and boring. You want to? I want to have like a restless spirit. I want to be someone who's constantly pushing and constantly changing and like reaching beyond my means. And this guy hates that. And he says, the nearest estimate I can make gives me now between 27 and 28 years of age. I come to this from hearing my master say sometime during 1835, I was about 17 years old. So it's just like so flippant. This is the only way he came across this knowledge. Okay, so right from the very beginning, we get a lot of information about his condition as a slave. I want to take pause for a second. Pull out a piece of paper. Just scrap paper. I'm not going to collect it. And I want you to try and draw your family tree as best as you can. I know some people that's really hard. Some people know a lot. Just, you're not turning it in. So just as best as you can, you're drawing your family tree.
Or by like marriage and pretending
What's
that
the
it's
time
not.
on it?
However you want to do it. I'm just going to give us like 5 minutes. Yeah.
And I will be able to work out my ancestors.
No, but you have that information?
Our family does.
Oh, but I was like,
Yeah.
No.
It's pretty much just tradition.
Except for also, I'm very not ready.
Wait. What I go by,
I am, but not really.
I live off that.
however you want to do it.
If my dad didn't know his biological dad, but his non-biological dad, do I do his non-biological dad then?
And
Or do I
occasionally
need
to
to
turn my
myself
dogs into
Two.
eagles.
However, my grandma doesn't have these guys, I'm just gonna put a question mark. That's kind of where it is for us, yeah.
I feel like putting two dads makes it more interesting.
Okay.
Family tree.
Because then I can talk about the craziness that is.
There's, oh yeah,
My family.
there's, I don't know his name, but there's a grandpa, a little one.
Do you know their names?
I know some of them.
Really? That's impressive.
Not all of them.
That would be.
I know more people on my mom's side of the family than my dad's, and my dad's side of the family is cooler than my mom.
Oh yeah, well, my family's Welsh. We have a dragon on our flag.
Oh, yeah.
I freaking hate flavors.
Swedish. What do you think?
freaking stupid. The Welsh, they're the worst. They're not like Irish. They're not as good as Scottish.
You can do it that way.
They're right next to the case.
I don't even know how to do my grandpa. I'm a polygamous family.
Oh,
yeah, that'd be tough.
None of your arguments are valid, really.
No, it's not true. Scotland's cool, but it's on a different island.
You think I would?
I have some.
Scotland is a part.
No, it's not.
Uh-uh.
Not when I blow it up.
You're gonna make a canal.
No, it's separate.
Okay.
I have family.
What if I make a canal between England and Wales? What are you gonna do?
Now I have to do. Oh, this is gonna be really awkward. How my family tree connects. my
What do you want
grandfather
from
to
each
my-
child?
Oh, that's not fair. What?
So I have my favorite tree on my phone.
I have it on my phone too, but I'm not doing that. I'm doing it based off my memory.
Oh, yeah?
I
Well,
can't
On and
remember-
on and on.
I don't remember my grandpa's name.
Oh,
You don't know your grandpa's name?
Yes, I do.
I
Oh.
My great aunt, she's so cool that she signed up for ancestry. And like it's all like this particular information. And like I know someone who's like a really far back in the revolution, but I don't know how we're connected.
Okay.
Can I just pull out the top of my family?
Sure.
Somewhere in there is Marie Antoinette. Somewhere in there. Somewhere. I'm not.
My
This is as far
grandpa
back
with
as I
my
can go.
Grandma made 13 kids, but I don't know all the names.
Made them. That's a funny way of saying that.
So there's not really anything that goes after that.
Oh, also Napoleon,
Napoleon's in there?
somewhere. Surprisingly not King Louis.
All right, one more minute. Get as much as you can.
What do I do if they like remarried?
I think it's like,
It's
I don't remember. It's like a dotted line or
Yeah, you do
something.
a dotted line between the two that were sparked.
That they're divorced.
What if they're
Yeah, I
married
think
at
it's
the
like,
same
so
time?
Mackenzie used to be married to Lad. I think it's like
Yeah, you
dotted
just do a
line,
line.
Lad. If they're dead.
I'm
Yeah,
related to
right?
like almost
He has
every
a
single
brother
US.
named Castle.
That's so dumb. That's like celebrities but Scottish.
Watch it, watch it. Cultural.
I'll just cross out the ones that are dead.
It's like how, it's like how.
Aw, blanket. Oh, I know, her great grandfather. Oh my God. I remember when he held blanket out the window.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
Yellow.
Well, on my dad's side, I can go back to World War I. On my mom's side, I can go to my grandma.
All right. Let's talk about your family trees.
No.
So I don't know if you've noticed, but in this community, family history is very important. I think that, I mean, obviously there's a religious component to that. Yeah, exactly. There's a religious component to that for sure. But then there's also like, even separate from the religious component, but when I say religious, I'm saying like for like temple work. But then separate from that, there is also just like a desire to like really dig into your family history. How many of you guys have grandparents who this is all they talk about? Yeah, it's like every time they walk in the door, let me tell you about, you know, great cousin twice removed or whatever.
My great essay was on family history.
Was it? Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay.
Great-grandfather.
I haven't read them yet. I'm getting there.
One of my ancestors
Should I be
left a
sorry?
horse on the frozen over Mississippi.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Why do you think, and it's not just our community, there's lots of communities, and old people in general tend to to have family history. Why do you think people are into family history, like discovering stuff about their family? Megan?
I think it mainly bases off your last name sometimes because my family, like my mom and my dad, mainly me, I'd ask them all the time, like, where did our last name come from? Because like most people like are confused by Steele, like they think it's pronounced Steely.
Oh.
But so like, oh my God, that's people. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's right, that's right.
I'm so sorry. That was so rude of me. Okay, but so, and it's like my great aunt did all the research because she was more curious and like she's even gone back and like found family
Okay.
that still live in Scotland that are still connected to us. But like it's just kind of cool. Like no, and you also get to know like, oh yeah, like they fought in the Revolutionary War and they were given this title and whatnot. But it's kind of like a little pride like feeling of like, this is my family.
Okay, good. I do think that there's a kind of pride in that. As we were talking, a whole bunch of people told me about who they were calling out who they're related to and why that's like something that they take pride in, right? I know Carter is related to Ralph Waldo Emerson. We've got people who are related to war heroes, like a whole bunch of like pride in like we got Napoleon over here. Where was Napoleon?
I'm Napoleon.
Napoleon, right?
I'm a direct descendant of Mayflower.
Okay, so you've got people who are talking about like their sort of ancestors coming over on the first boat, you know? You didn't do any of that stuff, right?
No, but you still
I
kind of
did.
share like
I
just a
know.
little bit of that same love.
Okay,
I was born.
so there's this idea that even though we didn't do it directly, it's like a part of us. I have a famous relative, you know that book, I think it's called Unbroken, the one where the guy is like shot down over. So I'm not related to that guy, but my uncle Lauren was in that same prison of war camp as that guy. And so, you know, for years, we're always telling this story. My great aunt Jo is still alive. That was his wife. And so she'll go and she'll tell the story of her husband. And even though that's her story and that's his story, it was like a very similar, he's mentioned in the book. I still take so much pride in it. Like I tell everyone I can, I'm doing it now, about this, my great uncle and like what he experienced in World War II. And it's like somehow that trait that he had that like gave him resilience or whatever, it's like I feel like I have a little part in that too, you know? Okay, why else think about family history, Riley? Yeah. Okay, so it's like making sure that your like blood pressure is okay, and like so it's something that you can be aware of and check on. Same thing for me. I've got a history of skin cancer, so I have to get my moles checked every year, you know? So it's like a way of like knowing challenges that might come up, and that could be physical challenges with your DNA, but also just knowing like challenges that your family has experienced in the past. You know, if you have a family that you know, if you have a family that has a history of being oppressed in some way, kind of knowing what that looked like for your family kind of prepares you for the future. So we read a book last year called Mouse, you remember? And it was like talking about learning his family history so that he like knows how to deal with the racism of being Jewish. Yeah.
I went to the Holocaust Museum over the summer, and I actually bought both books because I enjoyed the first part so much.
Oh, good. Did you read the second part yet?
Not yet.
Oh, it's really amazing. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh,
Well, in my case, obviously, it's just a lot of confusion
yes.
and like wanting to know kind of, because I know that my dad, we went all over Ancestry for a really long time. We did finally find biological dad, but it was like to know medical stuff, to just kind of know where he's from, what his background is. He found out he's the failure of his family. Because there's like a lot of weird family, like I feel like I would not be sad to give up my family name because my family name is that way. Because all of it is just this pattern of making things up to make other people accept you. My last name's made up entirely.
Interesting.
Because my grandma didn't know my great grandma didn't know my grandpa's biological dad and didn't want to have that shame of them sharing that maiden name. And so she made up Collins. So like people will say like, oh, well, you're definitely Irish because Collins went back to that.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, it's kind of finding like that,
What the heck?
pushing through all of the lies within my family and
Okay,
finding
good.
like that truth of where we actually come from.
Where you come from, and then it kind of sounds like a little bit how you are forming your identity against that too. You know, like this might be where my family is, but like this is what I could be sort of in juxtaposition to them. And without knowing that family history, you don't get to make that kind of clarity, I think. Yeah, Zoe?
So on my mom's side, it's not my grandmother, but we have this huge family, like really long, now, like, I'm pretty much like, it's like, people that can help you out, they're not strangers, you know?
Yeah.
It's like a sense of how we
Even when they've passed away, it's like their stories are still this source of connection. And so you look back and you're thinking, oh, because great great grandma Jones experienced this thing, I could like kind of learn from her experience because she's like a part of me. Hey guys, what's up? Hi. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, I don't mind. Go ahead.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mercedes. I'm an SCLA service officer. We have a ton of projects that we're doing this year, and one of them is called Socks for Legs. It's a super cool fundraiser, I guess you could call it. But what we're doing is in our community and school, we are buying socks that goes towards a donated prosthetic leg for an amputee. I think it's pretty cool, and honestly, socks make great Christmas presents, so there's that too. It's all online. It's kind of like Amazon, super easy. You don't have to bring any cash or anything. You can ship it to your house, which you just have to pay a shipment fee. Or you can ship it to the school, no shipment fee. You just get it a little bit later. How it works, we're selling packs of 3 for $12 each. So super inexpensive, pretty nice. And it's also helping. So, and not only that, for every package that is bought is one donated pair of socks for the school. That way we can give to the homeless community here at the school, the principal's pantry, and Action. So not only are you giving to them, you're also giving to the school. Super awesome. Yeah, for 90 packages is one.
Awesome. We have like a flyer right by the door. That one's yours, right? That's saved up right there. Yeah. And it has a QR code. Yeah. Okay. So if you're interested, whenever I've given my parents things that are charity oriented for Christmas presents, that's always what they give to years. They're so happy. So yeah, thanks.
So back to like the family.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy.
Also heritage, like where you come from. The only reason I know that I have some portion of Italian heritage is because I know that my grandfather's parents both came from Italy, grew up in the States, but I know their family was from Italy. And I don't know anything of the past of his parents about that, just because of decisions he made by family.
Okay.
But also German heritage. There's a reason why I like German so much is because of German heritage. My grandma is German, and in fact, her great grandfather Karl Wiener actually was a stonemason. It's actually pronounced Wiener.
Berna. Okay.
Yeah, but it's
Anyway, yeah.
Right. He was a stonemason. Like he did it really well, and he actually built his own house, and it's down in like lower Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And, like every once in a while, we drive past it. It's just cool. It's still there. He helped out with some stuff around.
Yeah.
The city.
So I think this brings up two things. The cultural heritage, I think as Americans, we're always reaching for that cultural heritage because we want to see how we contributed to building the country through that cultural heritage, right? So I think that there's like a way, like my family's super, super proud of the fact that I'm half Danish, so my dad's full Danish. And there's like this, they go and they went to Denmark and they went to the town where because we're a made up name too, they just called us Borup. So they went to the town of Borup, and my dad was super stoked because he's looking around and everybody looks like him, and he's just like, oh, these are my people, this is why I'm so bald or whatever. And it's like this way of like, now we know that we can celebrate those holidays, or we can practice this food, or like it's this way of like making your life a little bit more rich. The other thing he's bringing up is the fact that there's things that are like lasting. So James can drive by a place and say, my ancestor built that, my ancestor has contributed to this country, which is a really cool thing to have that lasting effect. There's so many people with their hands up, and we got to go really fast. So let's go to Matthew and then to Justin. And if your hands up now, you can talk, and then everybody else, no more hands. Yeah. Stop it.
So I feel like
So much.
in America, we have like a variety of different cultures. And because of that, people want to find where they're from, so they like have that.
Yeah. Yes, it does make sense, because if you just start with American, it feels like I don't have this like place in history. Yeah, Justin?
I feel like it kind of changed like how far your family is from.
Right.
My mom's side, my great grandmother, she's from Peru, like very dirt, not from Peru, like got house, everything's so just crazy to see like just how far I get to family comes to America. But see like how much, like how crazy it is just a couple generations back, like now, see now, like how far.
Yeah, so it's like demonstrating that idea of an American dream, that there's this like social progress through the history of the family. If you're like LDS, a lot of times it's about like the growth of the family too, and like how far the Borups have now spread into the country to like stake our claim here. Yeah, Megan?
I was gonna say, like, personally, like, growing up in Utah was always my birthday, like, oh, like, what part, like, which, like, where did your family come, like, were they a part of, like, the whole, like, Brigham Young's group that came, and it's always kind of, like, been weird because my parents are not from the exact same side of, like, my mom is from Utah, but my dad is from the East Coast, so he has more of the normal, like, East Coast bloodline, like, Italian, he's got, like, the Scottish, but it's different because, like, you sit there and you, like, people ask you, like, oh, are you, like, majority of, like, this, and you're like, no, you don't know, but, and it's different because, like, you can sit there and compare and people are like, oh, yeah, like, I'm French, but then I can sit there and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm like, my mom's brought one of their great-grandpas, he was born from an affair with a king, legit, and of course they
That's fun.
couldn't say anything, so his mom fled to America.
That's a
and-
cool story
It
though,
was,
right?
but like they tracked it through her like shipment, like my great aunt did, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I found her because it's Transu," and no one's like, "What?" Because it's a very like I don't remember what kind of name it is, but they found the records and they found his birth records, but they didn't find a father, and they went through her jobs and they found out she was a maid in a castle and had an affair with the king of whatever that castle was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I think like part of that too
It's
is like this interesting story that
Yeah.
makes you different than everyone else
Yeah,
too.
that's like the thing, because like
Yeah.
it's not the typical like, oh yeah, I'm Mormon and like my family came with like Brigham Young, but it like makes you feel like I'm cool,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
slightly,
I'm
just a little
unique.
bit.
Yeah, I like that. Cameron?
You don't think that families bring
No.
Well,
Well,
they
it's
got a
like-
different
not at
side.
all.
They've got like this kind of legitimacy.
It's
but,
like it's the general like Utah people, like majority of people who were born in Utah, raised in Utah, are like yeah, my family like was a part of like the Brigham Young group that came all the way, that were being like harassed, and they are that definite group, and that's what I think most people in Utah think is like everyone in Utah is. No offense, if you aren't from Utah, that's what everyone kind of genetically thinks, that like you came from that exact same
Yeah.
gene pool somewhere in that gene pool.
So part of it is though is like finding that uniqueness. And,
Yeah.
I think everyone tries to do that. Yeah, Cameron?
Okay, so I think one of the main things with the whole genetics thing is, well, people are proud of their heritage. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
My family comes from Germany. My grandma's grandma is cousins with the angel of death. But oddly enough, my grandma's dad fought against him.
Oh, interesting.
So, whatever. But heritage doesn't always have to be, oh, I'm so proud of this. It's more of like, it can also be, so that happens. I'm not going to do that.
So how can we avoid it?
How can we
too?
avoid that? And then one more thing I wanted to say is having heritage records, it's kind of selective to the type of people who even have records,
Mm-hmm.
which seems kind of exclusive.
And that's what we're gonna talk about with Douglas especially. Yeah, Ammon?
I think like at the heart of part of this, like there's of course like national heritage and national culture and stuff, but America is so individualistic that like the closest you can get to like unity but still be an individual is family culture.
Yeah.
So like that's why I swear my grandma is like, well, she's way into it, and it's confusing for me because it's like on one hand I don't know half the stuff because like my grandpa was adopted and all that, and then on my dad's side the only thing I know that's like even remotely cool is like one of my direct ancestors was an officer in World War I for Germany. But thankfully I wasn't a Nazi, so
Oh.
we're good.
You're not a Nazi?
Or like my
I see.
ancestors ran away. from
I
World War
see. Yeah, they defected. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's right. I love that idea of like you get to be an individual, but you get to be part of something too and part of this heritage. Yeah, Lucy.
I think so being able to see like who you're really good for them. You kind of like see like, oh, sorry about this. Like, I have the Johnson dose. For example, my grandma on my other side also has the Johnson dose. So it's like, I wonder if there was some sort of related, like I don't know.
Interesting.
And so it's like I can kind of like pick out like my little sister is gonna have Arno, very prominent dose. And like, she has her aunt's eyes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that it's cool. You can kind of like pick out and see like how your kids are gonna look, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's cool to see.
And there's a way that you like take ownership then of your ancestors through that. Like when I lose weight, I look so much like my mom. And then when I gain weight, when I'm like this, I look so much like my dad. And I kind of prefer to be a little bit chubbier because I'm like, I want to fit into the Borup side more than I want to fit into the Swain side. So like there's this way that like the way we look and the way that we're like attaching to, and this like obviously is not going to apply to someone who's adopted, you know, but like you kind of like find this way of like finding ownership with that family that I think is important. So Frederick Douglass doesn't get that, and he points that out at the beginning. It's a long way of leading to this section. It says, so back to the
Oh,
book.
we're reading.
Yeah. My mother was named Harriet Bailey. She was the daughter of Isaac and Betsy Bailey. So he does have that bit of family history, both colored and quite dark. My mother was of a darker complexion than either my grandmother or my grandfather. My father was a white man, so he's sure about that because of his complexion. My father was a white man. He was admitted to be such by all I ever heard speak of my parentage, but like no one tells him exactly who it is. The opinion was also whispered that my master was my father, but of the correctness of this opinion, I know nothing. The means of knowing was withheld from me. They've tried to do a lot of research into this, and they are fairly certain, I'd say with like 90% accuracy, that his master was his father, but they can't be totally certain about it. The means of knowing was withheld from me. My mother and I were separated when I was but an infant, before I knew her as my mother. It is a common custom in the part of Maryland from which I ran away to part children from their mothers at a very early age. Frequently before the child has reached its 12th month, its mother is taken from it and hired out on some farm a considerable distance off, and the child is placed under the care of an old woman, too old for field labor. For what this separation is done, I do not know, unless it be to hinder the development of the child's affection towards its mother and to blunt and destroy the natural affection of the mother for the child. This is the inevitable result. So this is his take on family history at the beginning. He obviously has this hunger to know about his family history, but again, he's deprived of it. It's denied to him. So just as a bit of a break, talk to the person next to you about why you think he wants to include these details right from the very beginning. Consider our conversation about family history and think about what he is deprived of because of not knowing who his dad is. Okay.
And so it was really way of feeling someone
So it's confusing because they didn't excuse you for this class period, but I'm assuming they're going to. like for the PSAT kids in last class period, they were all at school excused, and then this class period, they weren't. They must have not known how long it would take. That's why. So I'm gonna not. Oh, they went in and excused it. Okay, we're good. I don't. You never tell us anything. You would never.
I wouldn't dare. I've never done that. I need you to help me with the steps to reach out.
All right, let's talk about this section for just a minute more.
Never had nightmares about the sum sign.
So we talked about all of this like pride that you can take in knowing who your family is. And I don't mean to alienate anyone who doesn't know those biological connections, but like there is definitely something that people really do take this kind of pride in knowing who these people are and where they came from. Think about what Frederick Douglass is missing because of this. Think about how a huge part of the slaves played a huge part in building up the country, right? Economically, they played a huge part in like the physical buildings that still exist. Slaves built the White House, they have like a huge part to play in like the infrastructure of the country. And yet Frederick Douglass cannot really walk down the street and say, my great grandpa built that, or, my aunt on my mother's side had something to do with building the White House. Like he doesn't get to take that pride because he can go back to his grandparents and that is it. Think about cultural heritage. He doesn't know in the beginning here where he originally comes from. He doesn't say my ancestry goes back to Nigeria, and so I can take some pride in knowing that we have this Nigerian background and I can like enjoy Nigerian food and Nigerian stories and so on. He doesn't have that, There is also something deeply disturbing here that we need to point out. Why do they not admit if the master is the father? Riley?
And if anything, knowing that a white man has sex with a black woman, that would have been.
Yes. Yes. And that's for like, so it would have been not illegal, but it would have been improper. But you think about how the power dynamics work. If Frederick Douglass's mom is a slave under a master, there is no such thing as consent in that power dynamic, right? So it was rape, whether or not, they were in love, which we read about it here, like obviously not, but either way, it would have been rape. And so he's talking about how he was a product of rape, and he was talking about how nobody wants to admit it. And part of it is because of the economic side. Later on in this book, you're going to read about a slave master who intentionally only buys one slave, but makes sure that she is young enough that she can have a lot of kids, because that builds up his wealth. So it's really dark, the history of his family, and yet he still wants to know. He still wants to have those connections, and he can't. Yeah, Bella.
I also, that really makes me like super upset because the master would be the one like not in the wrong because he was raping her, he'd be in the wrong because she was a black woman.
Yes.
He would be looked down on because she was.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say by like improper. It's like no one's gonna prosecute him, but he's gonna be ostracized for that, and like people will think he's disgusting, but not necessarily immoral. Like in the same way. Yeah, Evan.
I also think like he spends a lot of time talking about how hypocritical it was for a white man to have like black kids and like have them still be enslaved, because like he would have his wife and he would have his white kids, and then it'd be really hypocritical for a master, knowing who his kids were, to put his little boy in a suit and tie and send him off to school while he beats his bastard black kid because he's not picking another gun.
Right, and he brings this up, and the way he's talking about it is like, wouldn't that be awkward for him? You're gonna notice how sarcastic Frederick Douglass is all the time. If you haven't noticed already, he's constantly like using understatement to show like obviously this is wrong. Only an idiot would not see that this is wrong. But I'm just gonna present it in a very straightforward way, almost like making fun of it, like really, really dark humor. Yeah, Lucy.
It's also like his master had a reputation, and like they're not about to ruin that reputation.
Right.
He's just like this happens a lot. This guy already. Like still today, they're just kind of like sweeping it under the rug, saying like this thing that happened.
Yeah.
It's just a cute,
Yes.
like with teenage pregnancies and that kind of stuff. They
Right.
just like
In this case, the important thing is that you now have another person who can labor for you for free and increase your wealth. Let's forget all the rest of it. So we've talked about 2 paragraphs of this book. We're moving right along. I'm gonna have you read chapter 7 through 9 over the break. So it will be due like Tuesday after the break. So barely, I think it's again 12 pages. Yeah,
Pages to
12
read in a
pages.
week?
Yeah,
You
so,
expect too much from me.
well, we gotta keep it going, but I
Oh.
don't want you to have homework over the break. So
Wow.
keep reading and I'll see you Friday, of course, but nothing's ever due on Fridays.
I'm not gonna be here on Friday.
Is that real or are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay.